And then I'm going to do the share screen in a minute. Anyway, so on your handouts, one sheet, the two-sided sheet, are the readings that we're going to go through today. You know, again, just like last week, since these stories are in all four gospels, instead of flipping around all the time, you know, we'll just read from, you know, we'll read from that. And then the other one's just kind of an outline, but really everything's going to be in a little bit more detail up on the screen. But I figure people probably like stuff sitting in front of them as we go through. So what we're covering today is Jesus cleansing the temple. And I'm sure that you've all heard the story before, but remember a couple of things. One, this is part of a series in the life of Christ. It's going to be an extensive series. You know, we've been doing, I think this is the 5th, 6th week now on the crucifixion, but that's all a part of Christ's life. Okay. And the other part is we go through these different things. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the raising of Lazarus. And then we talked last week about Jesus's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. You know, and these are things that Jesus gets to a point and he's the actor in the play. He's the one who's controlling all the different, you know, all the different scenes. You know, a lot of times people think as Jesus goes through these different steps that the Jews are forcing his hands, or the Romans are forcing his hands, or the people are forcing his hand, and he's trying to make the best of a bad situation. That's not the case. And we'll see that today with the cleansing of the temple. He is in control. Everything he does is to fulfill the will of the Father, and the will of the Father we find in the Old Testament, where a lot of these things are, you know, predicted. So I think need to wear my other glasses. I say that every week. So, you know, just an introduction, you know, imagine stepping into the temple courts in Jerusalem during Passover, a place meant for prayer and worship, but instead you find it overrun with merchants, money changers, and the clamor of commerce. This is the scene Jesus walks into. And what happens next is one of the most striking moments of his public ministry. The cleansing of the temple is not just about overturning tables. It was a bold prophetic act directly challenging the religious leaders and set the course for his crucifixion. Today we'll explore why Jesus did this and what it meant in the broader story of his mission. And Jesus has a mission that he's going through and fulfilling. We saw a long time ago when we were doing life of Christ. Maybe when we were doing Matthew, I don't know. But anyway, where Matthew keeps saying this was done to fulfill, and whatever it was that Jesus did, and what reference there was in the Old Testament of what he, you know, fulfilled. So he has that mission that he's you know, that he's working out. Okay. So let me do my share screen here. Let's see if I get this to work. Of course I don't. I guess I got it. Huh? I had it opened. Okay, so maybe we won't. See, I can't, I always get stuck here. I was just telling Don to go, you know, when I practice all this stuff, it all works. And then I come to, yeah, well, it worked here when I first turned it on. Doggone. I don't know how to get back out to be able to, you cannot minimize Zoom workplace. I don't want to do that.
He's mumbling.
Hold on.
He's trying to put this up on there.
Yeah. I don't know why I can't do. What does that one say? It's a matter if you do the recording first or you do the Zoom first. I can't get back to my desktop. That's my problem. And maybe we just won't use it. I'm going to do this. See, it won't let me do
The
that.
success of it working is inversely proportional to the number of people in the audience.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Anyway. we'll move on and see if it works by itself. And just wait, is my desktop here? That's a new desktop, not my old desktop. Oh, Boy, this is frustrating.
Gee, right click the Windows logo,
Where's the here?
show desktop. There's desktop at the very bottom.
There you go. See, this is why we keep Lowell around. Now, if I can only see it, okay. Okay, so now that's opened. And then I'm
Now
going,
go to share screen, you'll find it. Right?
well, I'm gonna minimize it and then go to share screen after I go back into Zoom. This should work. There it is. Very good. Let's see. Okay, so what is that sign say? Okay. So here we are. This is just our regular, crucifixion of Christ scene. I got a picture here. Oh wait, no. This says this seems to be the center statement from the Old Testament that deals with what we're going to deal with the the cleansing of the temple. In Psalm 69, it says, for zeal for your house has consumed me, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. In other words, he's saying he has a zeal for the temple of God. Okay, the writer here in Psalms and he says that those who reproach you, those who hate God, are now after me. Okay, and that's what we get when we stand up for, Jesus. So the first passage that we have to read, and it's on your sheets, I'm going to see if I can move this out of the way here. Okay, in Matthew 21, and Matthew 21 seems to be the most complete of the of the readings, but it says, let me see. I don't know why my glasses are so blurry. I just washed them too. Anyway, he says, and Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. That's a pretty bold statement. So think, somebody here thinks that we don't do church properly and comes into the church and says something like that. What would our reaction be? Yeah, see, that's the thing. We would probably react the same way the Pharisees are going to react. What if he had the crowd on his side, the outside crowd? Because we'd all stand up in arms. No, if you had the outside crowd, people lined up in the parking lot saying, we've heard about what you're doing in this church and it's not right. Then all of a sudden wow, I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to burn the place down, or what are they going to do? Because Jesus has this crowd behind him. So, not a real good example, but were you going to say something, Ray?
Yeah.
Do your microphone. I can put two on that table.
I don't know what church, and I don't want to even get into it, but in one of the churches that I belong to, there was a lady that wanted to join the church for the sole purpose of making contact with people so that she could help sell her home, the houses that she was represented through her real estate company.
Oh, I was going to say, was that Amway? Trust me, people used to do that with Amway. People would join churches to make acquaintances so they could draw their circles, and sell their product. People do that, and
isn't that equivalent to what they were doing there?
it's similar. Let's say that it's similar. It's not using the house of God for what the house of God is made for. So anything that you would do, let's read through these, and as we get through the more readings, we'll find more details of what Jesus is objecting to. But it says in verse 14, and the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. And they said to him, do you hear what these are saying? And Jesus said to them, yes. Have you never read, out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise? And leaving them, he went out of the city to Bethany and lodged there. Okay, so this is something I think that we overlook. I overlook it, but then when I study the passages to present a lesson, because I always picture Jesus turned over the tables, whipped the people, did whatever he did, and the Pharisees were mad at him, and he got up and he left town. But that isn't what it says. It says in 14, he says, so he's done all that. And it says, and the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. And then when the chief priests are mad because he's healing people, and people are attracted, to him. So, like I say, I always pictured it that he turns over the tables, does all that, and hey, I'm out of Dodge now, like that. But and we'll see with one of the other, readings there. Here's a picture. I don't know how well you can see it on there of Jesus whipping. It says that he took a cord of rope to whip him, and that's what he's got in his hands. It looks like it has knots on the, bottom and all that. Now, it's hard to picture Jesus doing this kind of stuff. You think Jesus would say, halt. Stop what you're doing. Let me tell you why it's wrong. At least that's what I think. I don't know what you guys think. But anyway, that's what I would think. But he's really taking action. He's whipping the people, kicking over their, tables and doing all of the stuff. Like that. Just shows you we don't understand holiness. If you think like I think, if you're on this, it seems strange for Jesus to do this. It's because we don't understand holiness, and where that line gets, where people cross a line that God won't put up with it. He didn't open the earth and swallow them up. So, he must be getting easier. Joe.
Yeah, but it's kind of questionable to me, why just now? Because he had been in the temple multiple times before this, and those guys were still there at that time.
Okay. Because his time had not yet come.
Yeah.
And that's what the scriptures say, a couple of times. We'll see when we get to the Mark passage. Maybe that's what I got next. Let's move down to the Mark passage here. See, Mark, it says in 15, it says the same thing. It says, then he came to Jerusalem and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold blah, 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 right? But last week, when we talked about the triumphal entry, and we ended it in Mark at verse 11, it said something to the effect that then he went, after he came into Jerusalem, it said he went into the temple and looked around. It says he went in the temple, he looked around, realized it was getting late, and he went back to Bethany. Now this is the next day. Like that. See, so in Mark's account, he looked around. He went to the temple and looked around. And it may just be because now it is his time. You better go scope out the situation and see what it is, so I know what I'm doing tomorrow. That's my thing. That's the way I'd do it. If I was Jesus, that's the way I'd do it.
It goes along with what you said earlier, though, that everything he did was in obedience to God's direction.
Right. Oh, it's definitely a God thing. You got to remember that that everything that a lot of the things that Jesus talks about are things that were prophesied about, or when he's telling people, his disciples, what's going to happen. And they kind of understand what he's saying, but they don't get it, until after the fact. And so this is just like I say, Jesus isn't like the puppet master, but he's in control, even at times that we think he's out of control. And we'll see in several weeks, when Jesus stands before Pilate, I find this really strange, but when Jesus stands before Pilate, Pilate does everything to keep Jesus off the cross. Does everything to keep Jesus off the cross. Jesus stands before Pilate doing everything to get himself on the cross. I mean, that's really something. When you look at it that way and you see what's actually happening in that transaction. So anyway, so the mark thing is, he says, drove out those who sold, who bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. I like that one. The pigeon salesman, like that. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, is it not written? There's the statement. He's reminding them, isn't it written? My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him. And again, that's what these last three things have been, with the raising of Lazarus, the triumphal entry, and today with the cleansing of the temple. These are the three big catalysts that moved the Jewish leaders to crucify Christ. Okay. And so they're just mad. They don't want to be called robbers. A lot of the things say that turn it into what does it say? Turn it into a house or a den of thieves and that. Robbers is a special word. Robbers is more of like plunderers than thieves are. It's a stronger term to use, Ray.
When I looked at that passage and everything else, and looking it up, I looked up justifiable anger. And justifiable anger is an emotional response to perceived injustice or unfair treatment. So that's what I.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, he's not in a rage. I mean, just because all of a sudden this is something, that bothers him and stuff like that. Jesus is justifiable, in anything that, that he does like that. So, were you gonna say something, Denny? Oh, yeah. No, I thought I saw you move. I see things out the corner of my eye, and if I saw something burgundy moving out the corner of my eye. Okay, hand him the microphone. Oh yeah, make sure your microphones are on, that the blue lights are on, blue light specials. Okay. Okay, go.
What you were saying, thinking, well, there's no question about it, Jesus is God. But he also became man, so he does some human things, and that's what he was doing in the temple.
Oh yeah, no, he does.
So, get out of here.
Right. No, he's mad, but it's not an irrational mad. But it's somewhere in between what you're saying and what Ray's saying, because I don't want it to be so much where people explain away his anger so much. Well, it's not the kind of anger that we would have. I think Jesus gets mad, but he's got reason to be, mad. So, Frank,
Am I on?
you're probably on.
All right.
The microphones work for the people online. They don't amplify in the room.
Not relevant.
Join the club.
Wait a second. Oh, now with Jesus taking the ropes and whipping and doing all the kind of graphic, violent way, could he just go like boom, and just do it without even doing any of that. He could just like, boom, knock his eye, boom, knock his eye.
People say that with
But he just
God.
wanna show that I'm like a man, I can be a man too. I don't have to show you that I can do it like that, like a Darth Vader, like Star Wars, like boom, boom. He said, I'm gonna take a whip and I'll show you how man, a man, like whether you're graphic, is that maybe it? You might be graphic.
No, I think he's, he's fully man, he's fully God. And they're not separable, so it's not like he's acting like a man and he left the God part in the narthex, God, stay there. Let me go do it's not like that. What we were talking about Friday, we don't understand all the things that, that aren't explained in the scripture. Were you gonna say something, Pastor?
It seems like Jesus's opponents had an opportunity, because both of these accounts are looking for ways to get him.
Mhm.
But he's causing this chaotic scene in the temple. And you figured they could get the temple guard or something, restrain him, kick him out, at least for now, arrest him, or,
Yeah.
because he's causing a disturbance. And I wonder if it's, the people, it says were astonished, I think were the words, but there were times when the Jesus' opponents were afraid of the people, like you
Right.
were alluding to, and said, what if they were for him? And so like what this scene is kind of hard to kind of reconcile as to what's going on here, because we don't know enough about it.
Right.
But you think there's the opportunity, you're disrupting our, well, not actually the worship itself, but what would we do? Like, we sell rib dinner tickets out there, and someone can clear the place out, something like that. You got all these pigeons flying everywhere, and just.
Because you have to remember that the stuff that they were selling were things that the people needed for worship. Like that. And so, like, especially like the pigeons for the poor people, but it was, for people to, up their game with God, if I can buy the right offering, and that goes aside, even aside from the fact that those people were cheating the people, by what they were charging for the various things. The main thing is that you just got to look when he says, my Father's house is a house of prayer. You've turned it into a den of robbers. You just look at that and say, okay, Jesus sees a difference there. They're not doing it right. They're not doing it the way that it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be done. You go back in the Old Testament, you go back to, I don't know, Exodus, Numbers, one of those there where Aaron's sons are left behind, okay? And all the other Israelites are out doing something, and the sons, who are kind of junior priests, because Aaron's the high priest and they're his sons, they decide to make their own offering. And they do it with what is called a strange fire. Okay, whatever that's going to mean. It's just not the right fire, okay? And it doesn't even matter what they did or how they did it, it wasn't the right way. Who knows what happens to Aaron's sons? Yeah, they died. God took them. And so again, there's that holy thing. That I don't think that we understand it. Well, those people didn't understand it, but some people did understand. Who? Ray? Oh, Joe.
Yeah, we have to look at these events in context with the final purpose. If Jesus had been very mild and, shall we say, courteous in the way he admonished and so forth, do you think that the crucifixion would have ever taken place?
Probably not.
No, so he had to create enough animosity in the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the scribes in order to bring about the will of God.
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible also. So anyway, so he says, in verse 18, he says, and the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. So with that period of time that he's in the temple and he's healing people, he's teaching people, he's doing all of a sudden all these people are saying, wait a minute, maybe this guy really has it right. Maybe he had a right to kick over the tables and, do all of those things. Now the Pharisees are just kind of stuck. And it's like anybody who has any kind of power, when they want to lash out against those who are exposing that their power is false. The ones that have the false power are the ones who are going to try to silence you.
Well, oops.
There's two there. Yeah.
If they were allowing it to happen, the Pharisees and, the corruption was going on under their
Oh,
eyes,
yeah.
they're turning a blind eye to it, and maybe they're getting some of the kickback to it too. So they're seeing their power and their income is gonna be cut short when all these people are getting, pushed out of there.
Let's try to put a good spin on it for the Pharisees. That's not, no. They're probably raised in that system too. To them, that's normal. That's the way we do church. Yeah.
We've always done.
We've always done it that way. Wait, why are you so upset? We've always sold pigeons for twice their value to the poor people because it helps them get a pigeon, but it also raises money for the church. I mean, that kind of thing. Just all of that, yeah, all of that kind of thing. Why do you think that the Pope was so upset when Luther was, banging on the Wittenberg door about how wrong the church is for selling indulgences? Selling indulgences was good as long as you had the belief that the indulgences help get your relatives out of purgatory, but also we get to build more churches because of the money. They built, what was it, St. Peter's, in Rome, off of the money from the indulgence. Isn't that a good thing? Seriously, isn't that a good thing? We work with it enough. I can convince you it's a good thing. Because look at the benefits that we get by doing this. And you'll see this with TV preachers selling stuff on TV. You go, there's a good example of doing things that even though it's in their TV studio and not the church, but selling indulgences because you listen to what they tell the people of why they need it, and so it's that kind of thing. So the Pharisees, they may have been brought up that way. It's one of those things, could be shady, but let's look at the good side. We got to weigh the good, the bad, and they go on from there. Dennis.
I've often thought that they had been doing it for a long, long time. I'm suspecting that it's written down somewhere. Here's what you charge, here's how you do it, here's why we do it. It's all written down somewhere. But
and their level of gouging may have been higher than what we think is fair, but they're saying, hey, don't go over this price because then you're really gouging.
Only afford these 2 pigeons.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure they had all laid out. It was very, very good.
Yeah. We got.
What's indulgences?
You told me the other day you're raised Roman Catholic. You should know this. No. The indulgences were it starts out with people being, it has to do with the doctrine of purgatory, okay? Is that people end up in purgatory. They don't go to heaven. They don't go to hell. They're in purgatory. They have to be purged of their temporal sins. They're saved, but their temporal sins have not been, fully atoned for. And it's really, the reason that purgatory is wrong is because what it says is that Jesus's work wasn't sufficient. But anyway, indulgences is that if you gave money to the church, that would buy 10,000 years off their 10,000 eons of time that they had to spend in purgatory.
So it's like buying the way out of And even now.
Well, relatives are, they can't, those people. Yeah, no, they're not a heavy,
Catholic thing?
what's that?
Is purgatory a Catholic?
Yeah, it's a Roman Catholic thing, but you gotta understand, it's not a matter of while you're in purgatory, God's trying to say, are you gonna go to heaven or going to hell? Everybody in purgatory ends up in heaven, you just haven't had your temporal sins purged for.
You can pay for it.
And you can pay, well, you can't pay for it, you're dead, your relatives are,
Uncle
Yeah.
John can make,
pardon?
Uncle John can make it if we help him.
That's right, and that's what prayer for the dead is and all of that, is that you're trying to pray the people, and again, it's probably started out as a good thought, as a minor kind of a thing, and it got built up into a bigger thing. Anyway, so it says, after his teaching, they were astonished by his teaching, and when evening came, they went out of the city, okay? So, which I'm saying that they are Jesus and his, disciples, which means they left on their own. I mean, this shows you how he paralyzed the Pharisees and them. Not only didn't they know what to do, they were just at a lack of, I mean, it's like, we have to do something. We can't let him infect the people. And Jesus and his disciples just walk out the door. They can't even stop, they can't even stop that. Okay, right.
And one of the lessons that I was taking, the presenter said, the other thing that was going on was that the people were setting up their tables so that they were blocking access to the temple, even though, for the Gentiles. So the Gentiles had access to the outer court, they couldn't go into the temple, but they were even being denied that.
Gentiles couldn't go into the temple, but I think that this all is happening in the court of the Gentiles.
Yeah.
So it's keeping them, away. There's a story in John 12, I think, and I think it's before or after the cleansing of the temple, but it said these a couple of Greek guys go to Andrew and whoever, the two of the disciples, and said something to the effect of, who is this Jesus? We want to meet him. So they went and they told Jesus, and Jesus meets with them. And that's supposed to be some symbolic thing of Jesus accepting the Gentiles into that presence. Because remember, Jesus was sent to the house of Israel, to the lost sheep of Israel. Jesus never said he was sent to anybody else. Yeah. Oh, wait, the pastor outranks you guys. So.
Just when they didn't arrest them, they let them leave. Jesus sometimes says, well, tell me what I said that was wrong.
Right.
So he says God's word, and how are they going to argue that?
Yeah.
And it's kind of reminded me of Jesus in the wilderness with the devil tempting him. God's word, sends them away.
Yeah, they're more mad at at the frustration of being out of control. That Jesus has taken control, and they've never had that happen before. Somebody that they could, it'd be like a bully that can always bully you until he runs into somebody that just doesn't see him as a bully. I mean, just doesn't see him as a threat. You're a bully, but you're not a threat. Joe.
Yeah, I always look at that, and the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him. And I've always looked at that as if they weren't seeking to kill him. They were looking for a way to discredit him, to destroy his.
And that could be, because that's just as effective.
The chief priests, when they gathered them all together, told them, you don't understand, you don't know what you need to be done. That it's better for one man to be killed than the whole country be lost. Say, well, then tell them that it went from discredit to killing. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because if you can destroy a person's reputation, you destroy, we see that in politics all the time. When people can't overcome someone's policies or whatever, Okay, surely there's a picture of him with a girl somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the kind of,
On his lap.
yeah, right. I mean,
Laughing about.
yeah. That's right. So no, so, and that is the kind of thing. So that very well could be true. Anyway, here's another picture. I like this one of Jesus kicking over the tables and. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, you know,
After
that,
that, they never could get rid of the pigeon.
yeah. Anyway, so then the John passage, you know, it says, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and this is important because John identifies it as the Passover season. And we saw that when we did the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and then it's when it switched to the scene of Mary washing Jesus's feet with her hair and the special perfume. It said 6 days before the Passover. You know, so the Passover is the centering of everything there. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And the money changers are a big deal because you just couldn't bring your common currency to go buy what you were going to buy. You gotta remember, people are coming from all over. All the Jews are coming from all over to be in Jerusalem for the Passover. They had 3 holidays that that the males had to be there. And so maybe if you bring in your Roman currency, you gotta remember they're living in Rome. I mean, what if somebody said, well, you can't use American currency because that's the currency of the government and we are the church, and so we have our own temple coinage. So you have to swap out your, you know, and then they're going to charge you a fee, you know, to do it. And that's what's happening here. Your money isn't good enough to buy it. Okay. Of course, they never say when they exchange it, they never say what they do with the Roman coinage that they took in. You know, we're going in and out with this. Let's go. So anyway, and making a whip of cords, so this is where it talks about that whip of cords. He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. I mean, now that's going to make those people mad. That's like knocking over the cash register and saying you can't have that. And he told those who sold pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my father's house a house of trade. So the pigeons seem to be the big thing. That got mentioned in all the accounts, pigeons. I think the cattle and the oxen are, I think, just mentioned here. Yeah, because the pigeons were for the poor people. You know, they didn't have a goat or pardon?
That's what Mary and Joseph bought the pigeons.
Right. Yeah, it's for the poor people, and here these people are probably selling them at a outrageous price. Pardon?
They're just flying rats.
Oh, yeah.
I would expect them to use a more sophisticated bird rather than a pigeon.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you gotta remember one thing about sacrifices. I don't think that, I mean, even though it's laid out in, you know, Exodus and Leviticus of what to bring for your sacrifice and that, but I don't think it's so much what it is to bring but you bring in a sacrifice. You know, because to them, you got to remember, they were kind of a visual people, you know, and so everything is done because what's happening has a meaning that the people see. And so, but what are you going to do when you're poor, you know? Like, you know, probably a pigeon may have been the least valued thing on the face of the earth for the people. I don't know, because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't say. So he didn't want him to make it a house of trade. His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. And that was the first passage that we talked about. Frank?
No, I was just gonna say, isn't pigeon, you get like squab out of pigeon.
You get what?
Squab, it's food. You make a fish, shoot a pigeon.
Oh, I'm sure maybe people ate pigeon. We don't. I mean, do we eat pigeons?
There was one guy, you know, he shoots them in his backyard and he said, they're really tasty. But I thought, I didn't try one.
And you haven't put your house up for sale? I'm sure that people back then ate anything that had meat on it. You know, poor people are, poor people like that. I know there's certain things that, I mean, you gotta remember culturally too. You know, we don't eat our dogs here, but in other countries they eat their dogs. You know, that's all cultural. And so we don't know.
But isn't blood like the sacrifice of the pigeons, let's say, or the oxen or the sheep on a sacrificial level? Isn't blood the only way to cleanse? And that's why they sacrifice the sheep and
Mhm.
certain times of the year.
Right.
That's what they said they had to cleanse, and the only way to do it is to give, like, my friend is trying to explain it to me last.
No, that's the way it was done. The sacrifice of Jesus replaced that. That's what a whole bunch of the book of Hebrews is all about. That Jesus is not just a better sacrifice, is the sacrifice. But it talks about his blood being worth more than that of the blood of oxens and goats and, all of that. So let's see what we got here. This is the other part of John. So again, the first part of that we just read was him telling the people what they're doing wrong. It says, so the Jews, this is right after that, it says, so the Jews said to him, what sign do you show us for doing these things? Jesus answered them. This is important. Okay. They're asking for a sign. What kind of sign are you getting? It's like, give me something that shows me who you are. And he says, they say, what sign do you show us for doing these things? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. Remember, he's standing in the temple. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. The Jews said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Now, I don't think that the disciple, now this is John talking here. I don't think they realized it at the time, but they realized it after the resurrection, because this is written after the resurrection. But that's the sign, because they're walking away saying, he can't replace this temple. He can't raise this temple up in, 3 days like that. And then you go to the end of that week, and then when he resurrects, and that's his raise, he was talking about the temple of his body. We know it didn't mean the temple, because when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and not one stone stood on another, the way it is today, close to 2,000 years later. All of a sudden the new temple didn't just arise. So it says he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. And that, when you were asking about why Jesus physically does this stuff, it's so that now they can reflect back, on it. Like that. So, and again, this is going to be happening after he raises from the dead. They're going to say, oh, now I get it. Like that. And that's at least for the people that are right, that are right there. And then the whole gospel story after that is the disciples going out into all the world to tell that very story, And the gospel is, there was a man who was once dead, who is now alive and rules the whole universe. That's the gospel in a nutshell. So what time we got here? Let's see. So anyway, so each of these gospels is a little bit different. They tell different stories, or they put them in different orders, or they emphasize one thing versus the other. What they don't do is they don't contradict each other. Contradicting would be, Jesus went into the temple, overturned the tables. The next gospel writer says, Jesus went into the temple, but he didn't turn over any tables. That's a contradiction. But they're telling the same story, but they're doing it in different ways. One of my favorite guys, Michael Icona, I don't know how well you can see that. He wrote a book and it says, why are there differences in the Gospels? You know, because a lot of people question that. You know, why does one writer say that there was an angel outside the tomb and the other writer says there was two angels? You know, so he goes into and he talks about the subtitle there is, you know, what we can learn from ancient biographies, how the ancients used to write biographies. You know, we think in a linear manner. He was born. The next year he did this, the next year he did this, and then, you know, he graduated high school, went to college, played football, graduated, went in the army, became a war hero, came out, ran for politics, became president. You know, that's the way we think when we're the ancients didn't. They just told stories about the person. Didn't even have to be in the right order. You know, because they're making a point versus doing, you know, year by year of the, and he talks about Plutarch, who's a ancient Greek historian, and a couple of other people, the way that, you know, taking their works that still survive and the way that they, you know, talked about it. So, you know, that's just the way that it was done. I think I've said this before, you know, like if I'm talking to my mom and I say that I saw my brother Barry at the mall. Y'all remember malls? No. Okay. No, and I say to my mom, I'm just talking on the phone. I go, hey, I saw Barry at the mall yesterday. I've told her a story because I'm a guy. I don't give a bunch of details. But I wanted her to let her know that we saw each other. My wife calls my mom and she goes, hey, by the way, we ran into Barry in London. It's his wife. I didn't mention her in front of Macy's and they had Christmas packages with them. You know, and it goes into an elaborate thing. Well, we didn't tell different stories. We told the same story, but we emphasized different things of what we thought was important in the story to, you know, to tell. You know, so we see that because in the triumphal entry, that was in all four gospels. This is in all four gospels. Some of the things are just in one or two of the gospels, but when they're in all four and you see those differences, you go, well, didn't they sit down and, you know, map it all out? No, they just told what they thought their audience needed to, you know, to hear and know. Joe.
Yeah, that gets back to that article that was written on the fact that the scriptures were actually recorded by 40 different writers over 3 different continents and 3 different languages, and yet
Over 1,500 years.
completely
Yeah.
incoherent.
Yeah, right.
And it's the same thing.
Right. Yeah. It's just that it's that important of a story because people always say there's so many contradictions in the Bible. Has anybody ever said that to you? There's so many contradictions. You know what your response is? Could you show me one?
That is
Yeah.
exactly how I respond.
Yeah, no, that's what it says.
Show me one.
You know, they go, oh, there's so many. And you go, well, if there's so many, show me one. And they don't. But then what they'll do is they'll point to something, again, where somebody says one angel and 2 angels at the tomb. That's not a contradiction. Contradiction would be if somebody said there was an angel at the tomb and somebody said there was no angels at the tomb. Because just because someone said 2 angels, that doesn't negate the fact that there was 1 angel.
Right.
You know, you have to have one to make, you know, to make 2, but they're emphasizing what they think is, you know, is important. So anyway, so that's why it's important to know that in the 4 gospels, you read them, they're telling the same story. They all said Jesus rose from the dead. They all said the tomb was empty. They all said that the women were there. They all said that at least an angel was there. They all told the same, you know, they all told the same story.
They all said they saw the risen Christ.
Right. Yeah. So this, they're all saying that Jesus went and did this in the temple. Right.
Apparently, I looked it up and it says that Jesus cleansed the temple twice. So apparently, The first time wasn't enough, he cleansed it a second time, and I wonder how long before he left down, he said, okay, boys, put it all back, we're back in business.
Well, so that, for those who don't know, the controversy comes, well, and this goes back to kind of what I was saying, is the way they tell stories. Because John has the cleansing of the temple in the second chapter of John, at the beginning of Jesus's ministry. That's where he said, raise this temple, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. The 3 synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, have it at the end of his ministry in the last week, during Passion Week, after he enters into it. So then people will say, well, maybe he cleansed the temple twice. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, like that, because you think the next time they saw him coming, they'd go hide the stuff. The narcs are here, flush it down the toilet. Oh, wait, I'm giving something away. No, like that. So I don't know that there was too, but people go back and forth, about it. But see, John, if we say there was just one cleansing, John's trying to, more than the synoptic gospels, is trying to show that Jesus is God. So he's telling all these stories that Jesus is God, Jesus is God. He goes to the pool of Bethesda, in chapter 5, and he heals, the guy at the pool there. He goes to the next chapter and does John chapter 6, and he feeds the 5,000. And then he's talking to the group on the hill about he's the bread of life. So he's telling it in more themes than he is chronologically. Dennis.
Yeah, and they're still doing it. When you go over there, then you can buy, if you went down the path of the Via Dolorosa, there's so many little sales huts along the way, you can hardly get through up to Golgotha. And they're selling a sliver from the cross that Jesus died on in a sealed envelope and cellophane. Incredible if they're selling anything.
That's worse than the internet is. You don't know what to believe. No, but that's what they do. It's a tourist thing. I mean, it's not, it's not a religious thing. It's a tourist thing. And they see all of these Christians coming over, and they go, we can make a buck doing it.
Like buying the water from the Jordan River.
Yeah.
A lot of people do that, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's like the one museum that has this skull that they say is the Apostle Paul or Peter.
Really?
Yeah, and the other one has a larger skull, what they say is the skull of Paul or Peter. And they go, well, how do you, well, this is when he was a young man.
Yeah.
It works good for the story, let's wrap it up. We'll pick this up next week because we're going to talk about what it all means. What's it all about, Alfie? No. But what it all means. But I also want to do a thing about the temple. Why is the temple so important? Because again, if this is going to be a catalyst of what's going to get Jesus hanging on the cross, we have to find out what the temple meant and what it was, why was it so important? Kurt asked me some questions last week after class because we were talking about, I don't know how we got into the temple part when he entered Jerusalem, but he was asking me some questions about the temple, and is that the same temple from the time before and all that stuff? And I thought probably wouldn't be bad. I mean, the temple, it was the center of Jerusalem, and the land's important. They still fight over, what's that, that Muslim temple doing in our temple place, and just all this. So I think what we'll do is we'll finish up, talk about the importance of what the cleansing is, and then talk about some about the, the history and the functions of the temple, and also what the Jews are missing by not having a temple today. So any questions? Any last questions? Or forever hold your peace? Okay. And just remember, if anybody tries to sell you 2 skulls of Peter, they're probably not true. Well, that's the thing, you were talking about the slivers of the cross, and they said, if all those slivers were actually the slivers of the cross that people have, you could build a whole city of buildings from the wood. Yeah. But people, yeah, people buy it. Because they don't know.
Probably olive wood too.
What's that?
Olive wood.
Yeah,
That's why they had to fence the garden they had completely fenced, now you can't even get into it.
because people are gonna take pieces and,
They stripped them bare.
yeah. It's the same thing when, yeah, and people do it just because it makes them feel good, and I guess there's probably nothing wrong. But when people go to get baptized in the Jordan River, it's like, because Jesus was baptized there, and, John baptized, yeah, but that's not the same water. I mean, that water just keeps flowing, keeps flowing through, like that. But we do, people, and it's probably part of our, probably a good side of our human nature is we do want to be attached to things. So that's probably, good too. Okay, well, let's close with the Lord's Prayer then. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Gene.
Linda, how you feeling? Good? Better? Kind of like this, maybe? A little bit like this. God bless you.